Good morning, Roshan, and good morning, gentlemen. Firstly, my thanks to my good friend General Katoch for the kind words and kind introduction, and also to General B.K. Sharma for the opportunity to research the subject, as also the opportunity to present itself and enrich it further, as he rightly pointed out from comments of all these uh, luminaries who are present here today. What I do, sir, that the subject has been addressed in a very large manner, but I have condensed it to as small as possible and finish it in about 30-35 minutes so that I have the benefit of wisdom from each one of you. Now, as all researchers go, I had created some research questions in my research, and each one of these chapters has a research question on which I've tried to build up the research and try to get the answers as far as possible. The introduction is, what is military strategy, who creates it, and what is the challenge of doing so? Now, in introducing the subject and setting the stage, I wish to make 3 points. First, that the greatest challenge of our times is to make correct and timely assessments of the changes that are taking place currently, and what changes do we anticipate will take place in times to come. And
Can't hear him.
making out a strategy cannot be taught. And honest judgments and large number of strategies actually failed when they came on to execution. So that our strategy, which we, if we devise it, may fail also, but we need to devise one. Second, India is geographically located in a far from benign environment, which argues for a strong hard power for national capabilities capable of defending our integrity and also sovereignty and also threats of all kinds from varied sources. Third, the 21st century warfare has gone beyond the 3 services, as the director rightly brought out. It has gone beyond Army, Navy, and the Air Force. And this argues for strong and effective national capabilities for defending our integrity. And there are new domains of warfare that have come up. These are like cyber, or electromagnetic spectrum, or informational. All these have emerged new. Most of them go beyond these services. They are in the governmental realm. So having said this, what is military strategy? So it is this direction that is given out to the people who are going to execute the strategy for how to use force or threaten to use force for the purpose and the policy as decided by the politicians, by the government. Hence, national military strategy should provide a framework for utilizing our national capabilities for protecting and advancing India's interests. Now, if it is not enunciated by the politico-military establishment in peacetime, if it is not planned for, if it is not developed, if we don't train for it, if we don't create capabilities in peace times, then there would be inadequacies for achievement of the political aims in future. And that will be a national loss. And I am not addressing the issue of future war is victory or future war is success. That is a bit of a separate question. But if we are not doing it, and I would state it that we are not doing it presently. Now, the paper I have laid out is in parts as given here. And of course, this is all a researcher's prerogative to divide the chapterization the way he wants to do so. And there are many issues, and I learned from this as part of the course of today's discussion. But this is broadly how I'm going to cover it today. I come to chapter 1, which is, how is this strategic geography changing, or is it changing, and what geostrategic context this changing strategic geography creates for us for the future. And before I start off, the differentiation between a doctrine and a strategy is basically that a doctrine is for today, beliefs for today's warfare. A strategy looks ahead. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So strategy has to be in that manner, envisioning things forward. How is the strategic geography changing as it pertains to India? Military strategy. Strategic geography of India is as important as the study of spatial areas of South Asian region as a whole, and it affects the national security as also the prosperity of India. Now, the critical aspect of strategic geography is that it changes with the human needs, it changes with national policies, it changes with development of nations as nations develop, and it changes with how nations get geopolitically ambitious and what are the relations between nations and between all of us. I have addressed the changing strategic geography as relevant to India in two parts. First, I think the most significant thing which is changing is the infrastructure development that is coming through the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And the second is the formulation of Indo-Pacific region. First is the issue of the infrastructural transformation that is happening thanks to BRI. The BRI is the most significant engine of China's geopolitical ambitions, and South Asia is at the heart of it. The geographic barrier of Himalayan mountains between Nepal and China, between Pakistan and Nepal, has been changed by railways, by roads and tunnels, or it would change in times to come. The railway between Nepal and China would come through next year. It will connect to Lhasa to Kathmandu and onwards to Lumbini. There will be, of course, China's pushing its technology and deep pockets to ensure that infrastructure comes through, despite whatever people might keep saying that it may fail. Three of the diagrams that I've shown on the slide are material. First is CPEC. Everybody knows about CPEC, and we don't need to delve into this. The important issue is the China-Nepal economic corridor, also called the Trans-Himalayan economic corridor. The number of roads which are going to land up in the course of next 5 to 10 years, which end up in Terai region, which is at the border of UP Nepal border or on the Bihar Nepal border, will be tremendous. So the access available for the Chinese, and in addition to it, those 9 Confucius institutes and 21 odd study centers that is made in Nepal, he has actually permeated the society of Nepal, which actually is an important issue. And then, of course, is the issue of China-Myanmar corridor, the road that is starting from Hunan province, comes to Roili, comes to Mandalay, and splits into 2 parts, comes to Ryukyu, which is north of the Andaman Islands, and towards Yangon. And this will change the character of the Bay of Bengal, of the shipping, which will take this route for transportation across towards Hunan. And then similarly, the projects of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, which I'll cover later. I also must touch Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, Gilgit-Baltistan is so important, and it's not CPEC alone. It's the 2,000 odd areas where in Gilgit-Baltistan, China is prospecting today. It is taking out rare metals. I've got this photograph from Skardu, where rare earths are being taken out from Skardu and transported across to mainland, which are used for various kind of industries. There is uranium being taken out. There are SEZs being made, all by Chinese managers, Chinese supervisors, Chinese workmen. And it has not materially changed the character of the employment of the people of Gilgit and Baltistan. So the character of Gilgit-Baltistan stands totally transformed in the course of this time, and CPEC is only an engine of transfer of resources. And actually, Gilgit-Baltistan is a very resource-rich area. I come to the next part, which is the second transformation happening is a geostrategy of Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific countries share a maritime border with the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and actually have a objective and a desire to deepen strategic bonding by enhancing maritime connectivity. The concept of Indo-Pacific actually coincided with the remarkable rise of China, unprecedented hostility, and by the sheer scale of its ambitions. Its territorial claims in South China Sea, its belligerence in East China Sea, its rapid advances in Indian Ocean region, and through ambitious and strategic economic initiatives like the BRI, it has actually challenged the international based rules-based system, which respected oceans as global commons. Militarily, Indo-Pacific is a region that has large number of flashpoints as potential armed conflicts. Hence, Indo-Pacific is becoming an arena for a great power competition between US and China. And for India, in its wake, it brings immense amount of opportunities to leverage partnerships with the littoral states, create collaborations with nations like Australia, France, Japan, United States. Of course, there are a large number of geopolitical challenges and strategic dilemmas also being created as part of this growth. The China's push at the infrastructural construction in South Asia has become extremely significant. In Robert Kaplan's terms, the Himalayas stand flattened, and in his own terms on the seas, there is a defeat of distance, and this is becoming truer. The strategic geography of India has clear dictats. The acceptance of Indo-Pacific as a single strategic construct linking contiguous waters of Western Pacific and Indian Ocean will shift the geographic center of gravity to this region. It's also apparent that with increased economic stakes and large maritime presence, China will have to cover Indian Ocean region with its larger naval presence, hence increasing the possibility of naval engagement in the region. Indo-Pacific also provides new opportunities to India's own geopolitical ambitions. So if India wants to be a major player, it has to leverage its strategic geography to its advantage. Chapter 2. It's about strategic culture and civil military interface. And much has been spoken about strategic culture when John Tanham, everybody quotes George Tanham when you talk about strategic culture. The questions I asked myself were that is strategic culture and use of force inseparable? I felt so, yes. And does India by history have a pacifist strategic culture? Second, is there an absence of dialogue between armed forces and the government, that is reading politicians, on issues pertaining to military strategy? A nation's strategic culture actually determines its conceptuology in prosecution of wars, its distinctive style in dealing with problems of national security. It implies that the use of force or a resistance to use force for promoting national interest has to be done by stating a well conceptualized national security strategy. Strategic culture and use of force are inseparable in most situations. How does India's strategic culture conceptualize what we call the enemy? For India, the enemy is an adversary whose aims and actions deprive India of its sacred territory, and we consider our territory to be sacred, which is not what most nations do, or subvert our society by undermining civilized value. In this context, China can be easily explained as an enemy because of modern balance of power considerations, its hegemonic and expansionist terms, its collusivity with Pakistan on nuclear, missile, or technological transfer issues are serious sore points. India's strategic culture is a complex amalgam of historic myths and legends and memories of ancient states and civilizations. The larger Indian thoughts on strategy relate to strategic autonomy. Now, strategic autonomy of now, which you hear the latest talk by Ashley Tellis, he says strategic autonomy is another word given to non-alignment. How it has been equated outside India. So strategic autonomy and sovereignty and nuanced approach to resolution of problems. The overarching opinion is of India being pacifist, but this must be debunked. Of course, we lack imperial ambitions, but see the historicity and what General B.K. Sharma rightly pointed out earlier. Look at the historicity of our wars that we have fought since independence. Be it be Hajipir Pass, in defense in Razangla or Khemkaran, or aggression and domination of Hajipir Pass, 1971 East Pakistan, or Kargil War, all show that we are not pacifist in this manner. We do not have imperial ambitions. That may be a separate issue, but we have fought the wars with gusto and with vigor. Of course, they have been largely land-based wars. And a strategic culture retains itself for use of force, which is land-based more. Hence, there are gaps here in the strategic culture that brings about of the jointness of three services. I come to the next part of my talk, which is a civil and military interface. A nation, and General B.K. Sharma rightly highlighted most of the issues I am showing on the slide. A nation that has unsettled borders and incessantly deployed in countering infiltration, terrorism, and left-wing extremism with a salience of maritime security, the bonding between civil and military is imperative. The doyen of Indian strategic thinkers, Mr. K. Subramaniam, had first used the word absent dialogue. Of course, it is later on come out as a book also. Now, it directly translates into a system where he said, politicians enjoy power without responsibility, bureaucrats wield power without an accountability, and military assumes responsibility without any direction. In the existential routine, peacetime functioning, the bureaucracy retains a deliberate, well thought out detachment from strategy, shielding themselves from accountability and responsibility. The political hierarchy about pressing matters and not inclined to contribute to military's conceptualizing of war games of an unknown future. You don't even know when war will take place or not. Military strategy is being formulated by the military in a vacuum, and that the politico-bureaucratic involvement in the national military strategy is only at the time of involvement in combat, not previously. And you see each one of them. It is instructive to read General Dipinder, who was commanding all forces in our Prakram, when he said the orders given to him were delightfully vague, and he's written in a book. And every time, and there have been hesitations of history in us wanting to fight a war. Every time there was a tyranny of limitations to our warfare. In 2008, when Bombay happened, so it is stated, and of course this is hearsay, which is stated that when the cabinet came to the MO Directorate for briefing, and they said, what can you do? And we gave them the grandiose plans of going with 3 strike corps across the western frontier and capturing territory and destroying prisoners of war and machinery, etc., etc. Pranab Mukherjee, who was that time the finance minister, said, "Are you sure? Is this the plans you want to do it? Who is going to permit you to do this?" And nothing happened. And nothing would happen because that thing is a side, because a politician and a bureaucrat, we recently in PIF last year, the defense secretary who retired 2 years ago said he has no idea of how a map can be understood, and he has never been invited in the MO Directorate for briefing. This is a defense secretary stating in VIF and in an audience chaired by General N.C. Vidge. This is the state of affairs of the involvement across in this on military strategy. The chapter 3 is, firstly, we need to envision what is a prospective war fighting all about. Will wars in future will be also like what we say today, armed, violent hostilities with adversarial states along disputed borders? Let's be clear, war is a historic constant. And the saying goes that the best teacher of war is war. Futurologists and strategists had in history forecast and laid down strategies and planned conduct of wars that did not succeed. As the military strategy is based on assumption of the future, all assumptions can go wrong. The easiest way out is to remain status quo. That's the best way of doing things in case I'm commanding and I'm at the helm. And that is why often it is said that the journals have a tendency to fight the last war. And the wars of the past were denoted with various terminologies. Battles of attrition, mechanized warfare, maneuver warfare, strategic air bombing campaigns, air superiority, amphibious warfare, air-land battles, sea control, sea supremacy, just to name a few. But the world is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and the operating environment is becoming more contested, more lethal, and it is becoming more difficult as time is passing. Future wars will be fought with disruptive technologies. What was a disruptive technology 10 years ago is a daily use technology today. What we are talking disruptive technologies for future will be a daily use technologies 10 years hence. Cyber, social, economic, psychological, they may not necessarily involve physical combat or destruction of the armed forces, as was pointed out in non-combat and kinetic warfare, forces may not be directly involved to achieve the political aims. Case in point are the two forces created by the PLA, which is the PLAF, the rocket force and the strategic force. They have clearly strategized that what they want to do is a range of deterrence, compellence, and coercion. The missions of a conventional missile strike for a PLAF could include launching firepower attacks against important targets such as battle space or deep strategic targets. The increased importance of precision guided munitions, space weapons, stealth fighters, strategic missiles, rockets, drone swarms, they are all manifestations of increased lethality in warfare. Second is the gray zone. And many of my friends don't like the term gray zone. They say it actually is not required to be spoken in this term. It is one more thing. But I'll take it on, gray zone. The gray zone in Indian context can be taken as a state of between war and peace, where our adversaries aim to achieve their geopolitical or territorial ends without overt military aggression and without opening the threshold for a full conventional war. Contextually, the growing toolkit for this gray zone warfare, the coercion below the level of direct warfare, employs large amount of non-kinetic means by both China and Pakistan, like information warfare, political coercion, economic coercion, cyber, proxy war, provocation by state-controlled forces on the LOC and the LSC. From fakes, deep fakes, online troll farms, terrorist financing, provocation of inimical elements, the kind of warfare that lies between contested arena between routine statecraft and open warfare. That's the gray zone. We can name it anyone, but it's short of conventional war, but it is actually war. And that blurs the lines between peace and war as it stands today. It's apparent, therefore, that the kinetic and non-kinetic or conventional and unconventional will at times get aggregated or disaggregated in new times of warfare as need be. I come to chapter 4, which is strategic threats and challenges. Now, India has unsettled borders. What threats and challenges does India face in the future? India has unsettled borders, as already stated. It is consistently deployed in countering infiltration and terrorism and left-wing extremism, and is currently placed in an adversarial kind of strategic environment which mandates a strong, effective force. Let me address 4 issues here. There is an aggressive China which has got a dream. Chinese military strategy documents, as we read, highlight the direction of PLA to be able to fight and win wars, deter potential adversaries, and secure Chinese national interests overseas. This includes a growing emphasis on the importance of maritime domain, for informational domain, offensive air operations, long distance military mobility operations, and space and cyber. China might be an impression of being a benign state. It keeps stating that we don't mean expansionism. It also sees it largely supports multilateralism. However, its actions portray revisionism all around and expansionism. It is desired to promote and shape an environment favorable to its ambitions. With increasing strength and global presence, stronger possibility exists of a threat manifesting from China in long and mid-term. India hence cannot ill afford to ignore China's increasing economic and military might, with its assiduous strategic bases in Indian Ocean, deliberate lack of progress on Sino-Indian border talks, and close economic and military affiliations with Pakistan. The period up to 2049, as it is stated in the dream, will have many intermediates, and it's been spoken of today, 2021, 2025, 2035. The era could be of major tensions. And if there is some kind of implosion in China, which comes up thanks to its large amount of debt or any other reasons whatsoever, India will face a major geopolitical and geostrategic anxiety on its periphery. The second issue is Pakistan. Now, is Pakistan a belligerent in perpetuity, lifelong? Is 70 years going to continue for next 70 years? It's a material thought into compiling a military strategy. So Pakistan is a nation which took birth without a clear identity, which is, and it's been unable to create one identity for itself, thereby maintaining integrity. It's itself an onerous task for Pakistan. It suffers from a crisis of identity, and it's got an omnipresent threat of balkanization. Anti-Indianism and Kashmir issue lend credence to Pakistan, credence to identity, and that anti-Indianism and Kashmir become the bedrock of retaining itself as a nation state, because Islam as a binding factor, as a glue on the nation, failed in 1971. So therefore, the larger binding factors that come across is anti-Indianism and Kashmir. In fact, anti-Indianism is taught in schools. It's ingrained in colleges in Pakistan. It's obvious that the DNA of the Pak army, which virtually controls the polity of nation, is changing and ensuring the change of psychology of Pakistan. It's also obvious, and this is what is being taught. This should have been Pakistan. This is being taught, the Dinia. This has been taught in Pakistan. This map shows the rightful origins of Pakistan. It's also obvious to any discerning analyst that any comprehensive strategic transition to a more benign and a friendly Pakistan in the foreseeable future is most unlikely. India will be kept embroiled in combating a difficult Pakistan army on the LOC and international border and in proxy war in the hinterland. Pakistan will therefore remain an adversary in perpetuity to whatever time one can foresee, and hence thus mandate hard power considerations. In matters of Pakistan-China colisivity, Pakistan has already upgraded its security calculus with China through the CPEC. The collusive nuclear warhead, ballistic missile, military, electromagnetic spectrum hardware nexus between Pakistan and China, and what they have been talking about, all-weather friendship or Iron Brothers. You know, this was a presentation which I got presented in Beijing, where the presentation was titled Iron Brothers. It's gone to menacing proportions. On the maritime frontier, I have previously shown a map which shows 15 odd bases that China has got in the Indian Ocean region, Indian Ocean rim countries. Whether they are occupying it militarily or not, but they're constructing 15 bases all around. And it has got port facilities all around, as I said. Additionally, China has created the world's largest and most modern navy. The number of vessels may have already surpassed the United States. It's possible that by tonnage it's not so, but by number of vessels alone it may have surpassed the United States. And of course, it is attempting to bring a blue water navy. We understand the difficult geography that China faces on the maritime frontier through inimical nations to operate itself in the ocean region. But that's what it will attempt to do. This all points towards Chinese intent at projecting power, seek to project its maritime interests, and create a permanent naval profile in Indian Ocean. These activities are portent of a future maritime arms race within the Indian Ocean and beyond. India's central location in Indian Ocean and its proximity to sea lanes makes it a natural dominant naval power. Indian diaspora Indian Ocean nations also has a significant diktats. The Chinese challenge in Indian Ocean region necessitates that India to continue with its build-up and modernization programs of its maritime prowess, including amphibious, maritime, air and naval, and joint warfare capabilities. The fourth issue and the last one here is insurgencies and terrorism. There is Pakistan's support to terrorist organization and proxy war in J&K, and it is well chronicled, and also in the hinterland. And the proxy war gives Pakistan distinct advantages against India. It remains a low-cost option by economically and militarily weaker state. In Pakistan, this allows the army to remain relevant to the sole institution of merit, which is the Pak army. It has greatly enhanced the toolkit of information warfare, from ingenuous disinformation and propaganda to taking advantage of social media for faster dissemination, fanning radicalization and civil unrest. Indian armed forces hence will remain mired and committed extensively in internal security in combating terrorism and insurgencies. Chapter 5, which is the penultimate chapter of my talk, is strategic guidance of national security strategy. As General B.K. Sharma rightly pointed out, that we don't have a national security strategy. Now, the concept of national security has been evolving over the years, and we are debating it. I see when you want to show national security strategy seminars, every year USI has a national security seminar, and every year the clause has a national security seminar, but no national security comes out of it. No document comes out of it. India does not as yet have a well-articulated strategic document. India's national security strategy is a must and should establish what we want to achieve as a long-term objectives. What are action programs? What are resource allocation priorities? And as a grand strategy, we must envisage development and coordination of all national power instruments to achieve national goals and in an ever globalizing environment. But most important issue, even before a national security document, is a strategic vision. Now, preparing a national strategic document would commence with a well-conceptualized vision, which is distilled out of disparate and different all types of ideas and imagination. They are articulated together in a large picture orientation for short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. This vision should be sufficient in detail to summarize the strategic objectives and intentions, and it should be conceptual enough in accepting the complexity of the future, and yet encompass the thrust of the military technologies and structures required to achieve it. Creating the strategic vision will be the most intensive process and would require a broad-based intellectual debate. That is what must start immediately. And last part of my presentation is on formulation of a national military strategy. And what are the key postulations? The conceptualization, as I have argued earlier, denotes that the national military strategy, which has to be created with sufficient forethought and analysis and not on a trigger. It's not that a Pulwama means a strategic which are presented 10 days and you go for surgical strikes. It's, the issues of Nagrota and Uri and or Pulwama or Balakot. This should be preordained. The areas that we occupied this time in Ladakh were preordained. They were planned earlier. They were there, but they are not known to the establishment who has to take decisions. This is essential to achieve the ends and the means at hand or likely to be available, or ways or concept of employment as pre-strategized. Hence, national military strategy is in execution is the responsibility of the military, can be given so. But stating the end state is a political task. The duty of military leaders is to see that the political leaders do not fail because they were poorly advised or poorly served by the military leadership. Hence, evolution of military strategy is a two-way traffic between the government and the military and the civilian professionals, which rightly highlighted from NTRO to DRDO to BAR to name a person outside who handles cyber coordinator, etc. In which a democratic dispensation like ours, the final call will rest with the government. National military strategy envisages employment of all of a nation's capabilities and capacities to undertake operations in domains like armed forces, also space, cyber, electronic warfare at the highest of levels. And we need long-term planning, development, and procurement to assure victory or success. More fundamentally, the notion of separate operational domains between cyber, army, in navy, air force, space, these will not survive the reality of future wars. The three services have distinct separate cultures. They have separate ideals, they have separate organizations, their capabilities. All conflicts fought by India have eventually landed up in land wars, in which army, take the collar up, has been the predominant players as the threats faced by the country are across the border. This is a bane. The armed forces themselves are quite happy with the existing arrangements, in which each chief operates and develops his own services almost autonomously without any involvement of any other. What then is a joint military strategy? The terminology of jointness or joint military strategy has been spoken of in the armed forces for a very long time. Jointmanship, it means conducting integrated military operations with a common strategy, methodology, and conduct. If we want to institutionalize jointmanship, I could give 5 headings, which I've given out here: joint planning, joint operational structures. First one is joint planning and development of doctrines and strategies. Structures, evolution of joint equipment policy, procurement policies, integrated preparation of budget, etc. And of course, institutionalized joint training. As stated earlier, the joint military strategy is a subset of a national military strategy. It can be defined easily by this equation of means, base, and ends. And I've tried to explain each one of them in that manner. The director had referred to a strategic guidance by the defense, but for defense ministry. But the fact is, what is defense ministry? Does it have the capability of devising it? The RF is a shallow document. Joint military strategy consists of establishment of military objectives, the formulation of military strategic concepts to accomplish the objectives, and creation and use of military resources to implement those concepts. Now, I would end with a little bit of talk on conventional deterrence, conventional warfare. And that's the last part of my talk today. Military conventional deterrence remains fixated in an all-out or limited high and conventional war that remains within the ambit of state versus state warfare, largely due to contested borders and because of maritime domain. In case of India, conventional military superiority, the threat of deterrence by punishment, has failed. We've not been able to deter any one of our adversaries. Long-range strategies must be based on estimates of future threats, objectives, and requirements, and are therefore not constrained or dominated by considerations of what is the current force. Future has to be a clean slate. It has to be built on the current force, but it is not the current force. Military objectives and military strategic concepts of a joint military strategy establish requirements of capabilities essential for the 3 services individually and as a whole. The acquisition of these capabilities is in turn influenced by the availability of resources, say the defense annual budgets, and what predictive allocation can be done. We have to consider requirements as an element of the joint military strategy to avoid strategical capabilities mismatch. One force has gone ahead and the other force has gone behind is incorrect in the whole scheme of things. Case in the point is, a lot of people are writing we require additional strike corps the army. Some say 42 squadrons, some say 55 squadrons for the Air Force. 150 ship Navy, including a 3rd aircraft carrier, all with finite resources. Each service is planning its own deterrence on its own and winning wars independently. That is why operational strategies must be based on joint capabilities and joint planning and not on threats alone, as threats are examined by each service independently and autonomously. I made some key postulations which I'll leave it for reading or for the purpose of reading in the article, and the paper comes out subsequently. To sum up, indeed, making of a national military strategy cannot be taken as a casual file pushing exercise which goes between service headquarters and the MOD and all these people, and finally nothing comes out of it. That's a bureaucratic way of doing things. $65 billion and more are being spent. 15 rupees of expenditure of nation goes into defense. That's for a developing nation. It is a responsibility to evolve a national military strategy which actually is conjoined together. Without that, there would be problems when next time there is a full-fledged war. Thank you, sir, and I rest my case with that.
Thank you, Rakesh.